Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another edition of our webinar series, Inside Immigration. Today, we're joined by panelists at Green and Spiegel, Khatidja, Moloo-Alam, and Jonathan Green. Please feel free to ask any questions via the pop-up text bar on the right side of your screen, and we'll do our best to address them at the end of the webinar. If the panelists do not get to your question, you can contact them through the information provided on screen now. And with that being said, I'm going to hand things over to the panelists.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen. So today we'll be going over a couple of important items and updates when it comes to immigration in Canada. And the first one we'll be speaking about is express entry. And express entry has had some recent developments as of last month, specifically with the resumption of general draws. A couple of the main categories for express entry applicants, the Canadian Experience class and the Federal Skilled Workers class, were on pause for quite some time. Specifically, the Federal Skilled Workers class have been on pause since around December of 2020, and the Canadian Experience class since December of 2021. And July brought the slow resumption of draws back to that program, or those programs, which has been great. The government had announced that this resumption would be a slow process and would gradually increase. And now we have a couple of draws over the past month or 2 months to rely on. So since our last webinar, there's been 2 draws, but before that, we've had 2 more draws. So just to provide a brief overview, draws were resumed on July 6th with 1,500 invitations with a cutoff score of 557 points, which is a very high score. And we've seen both the number of invitations and the required cutoff score, the invitations increase and the cutoff score decrease. So there was another draw on July 20th, which saw 1,750 invitations, so an increase of 250, with a cutoff score of 542. So a little bit over less than 10, so 15 points. This month, we've seen 2 draws so far. On August 3rd, there was a draw where 2,000 individuals were invited to apply for permanent residence. The score required was 533. And then just about 2 weeks ago, there was another draw announced with 2,250 invitations with a point score of 525 required. We're expecting another draw in the next couple of days or so, assuming this 2-week practice continues. And the government's assessment that they would resume a slow, gradual approach to invitations has remained consistent. So likely the next draw will be about 2,500 individuals invited to apply. And we've seen about 100 points be knocked off each subsequent draw. And we're hoping that that trend resumes, because being in the 500 plus point system is quite challenging and requires a lot from individuals. So our expectation over the next couple of months is that we see these point scores required for express entry continue to trend down, and the number of invitations expressed go up. Pre-COVID, we saw invitations around 3,000 to 5,000 individuals, in some instances more, but our expectation is that it returns to around that range. And so long as there are extremely qualified candidates in the 500 plus score system, we expect the draws to continue there, but they may go down slightly. It's hard to determine exactly what the government's priorities are, but the slow resumption of express entry scores has been happening. For applicants that are looking to increase their scores, there are a couple things that they can do. The first that we generally recommend is looking towards provincial options. So individuals who have obtained master's degrees or PhDs in Ontario, as an example, could qualify for some provincial streams, which I'll speak about shortly. They can work on improving their language scores if their language scores aren't fluent already. In many parts, these candidates who have over 500 points in the express entry system are quite young, so they're under or close to 30 years old, generally fluent in English, have at least a master's or multiple post-secondary degrees, and also have experience working in Canada in a skilled work environment. So it is challenging to obtain these scores. It is possible, but in the case that people can't obtain these scores, provincial options like the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program are available. And just recently, we've seen 2 very recent draws or nomination draws under this program. So yesterday, August 30th, 680 applicants were invited to apply under the master's graduate stream, provided they had a score of 37 and above. The Ontario program uses a different scoring method. And yesterday as well, on August 30th, we saw 101 applicants under the PhD graduate stream with a score of 26 or more be invited to apply. And scores are evaluated on a range of different factors, which can include the type of degree you've obtained, if you have any work experience, if you have work experience, what is the salary that you've been receiving for that employment. All of those can range and can help you obtain a nomination from the province. There also are some other options for permanent residents. So in Ontario, there is an entrepreneur program, but obtaining an invitation to apply under that program is very, very difficult. In the GTA, the expectation is that you have to invest a minimum of 600,000 Canadian dollars, but we've seen successful applicants have invested at least 1.5 to $3 million. So it's not an option for a lot of applicants. Outside the GTA, generally the minimum investment is 800,000 for successful applicants. So those are some of the updates when it comes to express entry and some provincial routes. And I'll pass it over to Khatidja to speak a little bit about COVID-19.
Hi. So the COVID-19 travel update and ArriveCAN requirement update is that pre-entry tests are no longer required for fully vaccinated travelers entering Canada by land, air, or water. But ArriveCAN is very much still in use. So within 72 hours before entry into Canada, fully vaccinated travelers must still use ArriveCAN to be exempt from quarantine and testing. And failure to submit travel information and proof of vaccine using ArriveCAN could result in a $5,000 fine. So download the app. Upon entry to Canada via air or land, you could be randomly selected for mandatory arrival testing. The mandatory test must be completed with an approved test provider. Upon entry to Canada, if you have been selected for a mandatory random arrival test, you will be notified through the email you provided in your ArriveCAN submission within 15 minutes of completing your customs declaration and receiving your kiosk receipt. This email will contain all the information necessary to complete your mandatory test. You can take public transportation, including connecting flights, without waiting for your arrival test results. And you're also not required to quarantine while you're waiting your test result if you were randomly selected for a mandatory arrival test. Unvaccinated and partially vaccinated children under the age of 12 are not required to provide a valid pre-entry test result if they are accompanying a fully vaccinated adult. But unvaccinated or partially vaccinated children must wear a mask in public settings, for example, school or daycare, for the first 14 days after entry. And then children who are less than 5 years of age are not required to test regardless of their vaccination status. Unvaccinated Canadian citizens and permanent residents can enter Canada, but they must meet all of the pre-entry, arrival, day 8 testing, ArriveCAN, and quarantine requirements. Now, unvaccinated travelers from the US who are working, for example, or have essential functions would likely be permitted to enter. For example, as I mentioned, if they're going to and from work, if they're attending a medical appointment, or for example, cross-border custody arrangements. At this time, unvaccinated visitors are still not permitted entry. There is an exemption for Ukrainian visitors who are unvaccinated to enter Canada. And that's the update. I'll pass it back to Jonathan.
Thanks. So we have seen a lot of processing delays, I think in the past 2 years especially, as a result of COVID-19. And so we wanted to provide a quick update on what these processing delays look like, what to expect, how they've changed over time, and our expectations on how they'll change in the future. So on the temporary application side, we've seen some applications range quite heavily and change. a lot of the processing times are listed online, and they're listed as average processing times. So depending on the application, the level of the work permit, for example, the urgent need to come to Canada as a visitor, as an example, they'll be processed differently, but the average processing times are posted online. And throughout the pandemic, we've seen, for example, on the work permit side, large fluctuations on a week-to-week basis, and especially on a month-to-month basis. And so as an example, we've seen some work permits where the average posted processing time is listed as high as 85 weeks. Now, this would have been at the peak of delays, and we've slowly seen progress from the government in moving through the backlog, while it was prioritizing applications that need prioritization. And so the 85-week example, work permits from that country have reduced to around 50 weeks. So there's been some good progress with that. But I think it's important to note that if you've applied for a work permit, if you've applied for a visitor visa, those applications can change over time. But we have heard some good news from the government that their intention is to move through these backlogs in a much more efficient manner and prioritize more resources there. So for work permits, I'd encourage everyone to remain patient when it comes to posted processing time. And I'll speak a little bit more about federal court options in a little bit, should processing time for your application exceed what's listed online. When it comes to study permits, we've seen a lot larger frustration from individuals, especially with the beginning of the school year having already started in some colleges and universities in Canada and starting in a couple weeks. So in terms of what the posted processing times are, for individuals outside of Canada, the times are listed as 12 weeks, regardless of which country you're in. And there'll be some variability there in terms of some countries will process study permits faster, others won't. If you're within Canada and applying for a study permit, processing times are listed as 4 weeks, so a lot faster. From our experience, we've seen governments, or the government of Canada, allocate resources to study permits, especially towards the beginning of the school year. Although at this stage, if you haven't applied for a study permit yet for the September semester, it may be quite a challenge to obtain that study permit. And so we'd encourage you to speak to the university or college in which you've been accepted to in Canada, as well as look towards other arrangements concerning if you can go to school for, through online learning, if there's other universities you can attend for the first semester of the year of school, things like that. Visitor visas have quite a lot of fluctuation as well. So we've seen for some countries be close to half a year, and for other places, as an example, if you're applying to for a new visitor visa in Canada, it's currently averaging 15 days. So there is a wide range, and again, it's important to plan in advance. Specifically in this situation, if you're planning to come to Canada for a trip and the posted processing time is quite large, you should plan accordingly and don't book flights until you're aware of that. On the permanent side, we've just seen a lot of the express entry draws begin again, and so we don't necessarily believe that the posted times are accurate. So right now, for a federally skilled worker, average posted processing time is 26 months, and for people in the Canadian experience class, it's 14 months. Our expectation, although there's no guarantee, is that the government moves to process the new applications for the individuals who've just been invited to apply within the 6 to 8 month range that they've promised to do, which we're hopeful about. Coming to the federal court, an application for Mandamus is something that our firm has been assisting clients with more and more often. And that application is available to individuals should their applications be significantly beyond posted processing time. And the requirement to be able to apply at the federal court for relief in this way is that the delay has been longer, which I just mentioned, that the applicant or their legal counsel is not responsible for the delay. So an example of the applicant being responsible is if immigration has reached out for police clearance certificates and the applicant hasn't provided them, and the authority has not provided, so immigration has not provided a satisfactory justification for the delay. If there is significant background checks that need to be completed, then that can be a reasonable delay. So we've assisted clients in filing the required application at the federal court, outlining all these concerns and moving through that process. So we just wanted to present that as an option which is available Generally, the longer and past processing time it's been, the stronger the application is. And so it is an opportunity available to people. Our hope, though, is that these types of applications are reduced because the government's committed to a couple of things recently. The most prominently that they've announced they're aiming to hire 1,250 employees by the end of the fall to move through a lot of the backlogs and increase processing capacity into the future. And one of the commitments that they've made is right now about 54% of all applications are considered in backlog, so beyond that posted processing time. And their commitment is to move towards processing new applications within the specified standards about 80% of the time. There'll be some cases that require additional time to process, and so they'll be beyond that posted processing time, but the vast majority will be posted within that time, which is great. Our hope is that the government moves forward on reducing some of the processing times and makes them more rigid, because right now a lot of clients have submitted applications and seen processing time dramatically increase. And so our hope is that the posted processing times will remain the same, and so clients can expect a certain level of processing time, and so they can plan accordingly with their lives. Should they plan to visit Canada, they can book flights or prepare their lives, vacation time, whatever it may be, to come to Canada. With a work permit, arrange for schooling to start on a specific month, as opposed to have to worry about fluctuating times. So that's what the processing situation is like in terms of applications. Our hope is that we don't have to submit applications to the federal court at this time or into the future, but there are certain circumstances that require it. So off to Khatidja to speak a little bit more about some of the other bits.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. I'm going to talk about the new temporary public policy, which came into effect on June 13th, 2022. That has to do with the post-graduation work permit extension. So these are open work permits for individuals with expired or expiring post-graduation work permits that did expire or will expire between September 20th, 2021 to December 31st, 2022. These individuals will have the opportunity to work in Canada for an additional 18 months by either extending their work permit or applying for a new one. For those individuals who are currently in Canada, they will also have the ability to work in the interim period while their permit is being extended or a new one is being issued. The application process opened on August 2nd, 2022. So if your post-graduation work permit expired from September 20th, 2021, and you are still in Canada without status, you have to apply to restore your status in conjunction with the post-graduation work permit application. And under these special measures, you're allowed to restore your status even if it expired more than 90 days ago. Starting August 8th, 2022, people with post-graduation work permits that had expired or will expire from September 20th, 2021 to December 31st, 2022, will receive an email indicating that they are allowed to work in the interim. This interim work period will be in effect until May 31st, 2023. But it is important to note that this interim measure can't be used by itself to return to Canada. Applicants, as a side note, applicants who've applied through the TR to PR pathway whose PR applications have not yet been finalized, they are eligible to apply for an open work permit. And as long as your passport is valid, those applying for the open work permit can receive one with an end date of December 31st, 2024. And the light has turned off in my office because apparently I wasn't moving around enough. So I think it's gone a little bit dark. Oh, there we go. I moved and it turned on. Okay. And then the last point I want to touch on is an update with respect to Canada's work resettling individuals from Afghanistan and the Ukraine. With respect to Afghanistan, In the last year, Canada has welcomed over 17,000 Afghan refugees, and the special programs for Afghan refugees are still in place. For example, a pathway to permanent residence for family members of former interpreters. There's a special immigration program for Afghan nationals who closely assisted the Canadian government with their efforts in Afghanistan. And finally, there is an economic mobility pathway pilot, which combines refugee resettlement and economic migration. So it helps skilled refugees immigrate to Canada through existing economic programs. This pathway still requires some sort of UNHCR recognition, whether it's the actual status itself or at least a letter from the UNHCR stating that this person has tried to is in the process of being assessed by the UNHCR for refugee status. And with respect to the Ukraine, the Canadian-Ukrainian Authorization for Emergency Travel program is still in place to help Ukrainians and their family members come to Canada as quickly as possible. And it provides those individuals with the ability to visit, work, or study while they're in Canada. It's open to Ukrainian nationals and family members. Family members are spouses, dependent children, and dependent children of the dependent child. So it's quite a broad group of individuals who qualify as family members of a Ukrainian national. There are no fees to make the initial visitor visa, work permit, or study permit application, and there are no fees to extend those visas if and when necessary. The medical exams are not free, but visitor visas allow for travel in and out of Canada for up to 10 years, and work permits are currently being issued for up to 3 years. If you heard anything here that you want more information about, please feel free to contact the firm for a consultation. Otherwise, I think if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat.
So I see one, Khatidja, maybe I can provide some information on. So we received a question about what our expectation is for some of these express entry draws into the future and whether or not they'll reach a lower level around the 450 range. I wish I had, I could see into the future and could tell you exactly what it is. The only thing we can rely on is some of the past data we have. And over the past couple of draws, we've seen immigration is slowly reducing the point cutoff to apply for PR in express entry. And we expect that trend to likely continue. When it comes to applicants in the pool, there's about just under 9,000 individuals with a score above 500. So it is likely, assuming that more and more individuals don't join the pool, it is likely that the scores will dip below 500 at some point. It's hard to say whether or not that will be before the end of the year. My estimate is that we may see some draws below 500 before December. If they would drop below closer to 450, there's about 60,000 people within that 450 to 500 range. So it is a large pool. It is possible, we've seen draws around there before, but for the next little while, our expectation is that the draws will be quite high, at least for the next couple, while they slowly increase the number of individuals that are invited to apply in each draw. So that was one of the questions. Let's see here. So it looks like we have another question about the postgraduate work permit policy that was introduced, specifically as it relates to individuals who may be out of status. For questions like that, we'd encourage you to speak to us directly because they can be based off of very specific instances. Generally, for individuals that have applied for restoration, our advice, and it is case by case, it's generally that they're not authorized to work. There may be some temporary policies or some exemptions, but generally, if you're out of status and have applied for restoration, you don't have valid status to work in Canada at that time. So that's what we would encourage in those situations. But for more specific details on a case by case, please reach out to us.
I think so. There's another question about draws. What would happen with the occupation-based draws starting early next year? Would there be any regular draws based just on CRS? Then too, if our occupation isn't in demand. Again, these are things that the government kind of decides on. We have no control or information about that.
I think what I would say though is we'll have to see exactly how strict the occupation-based draws are. Some of them can be much more general, where lots of individuals and who have skilled work experience may apply, but we'll have to wait and see exactly what the draws look like to be able to evaluate. But my expectation is that individuals who have a relatively higher score should be able to find pathways, because if they haven't already obtained, let's say, a provincial nomination, that may be available to them should these specific occupation-based draws begin to exist. So there'll be options, and we'd encourage everyone, once those come out, to reach out to us, and we can further advise on the specific situation there.
Thanks, Jonathan. It looks like all the questions. So let's wrap it up. I'd just like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. And a special thanks to Khatidja and Jonathan for sharing their expert knowledge today. For those in the audience, if you'd like to discuss the topics today in more detail, please reach out and book a consultation. You can find Jonathan and Khatidja's contact information on screen now. And I'd encourage everyone to sign up to our alerts and follow us on social media to keep up to date with the latest developments inside Canadian immigration. And until next time, everybody, stay safe.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.